What's up, everybody? This is the Booch, and welcome to episode 12 of the Boochcast reviews Darkside of the Ring. And we've got a great one for you this week. It's one that, out of all the stories I've heard in wrestling, this is another one that somehow has managed to slip my mind, and one that I was definitely not aware of, which is rare for me. But after I saw it, I was excited and couldn't wait to talk about it. And of course, I'm referring to the assassination of Dino Bravo. You would think that with this being a tragic story, I would have heard about this somewhere. But to my surprise, I had no idea this ever happened to Dino Bravo. But then again, I didn't know much about Dino Bravo except for some of the classic matches I'd seen at some WrestleManias. But either way, I'm excited to get it started, so let's get it started in here. So, of course, we kick things off learning about Dino Bravo. He was an icon and idol in Quebec. He was big, strong, and could bench press 500 pounds. He was considered the Hulk Hogan of Montreal. He combined relentless ambition with a fiery intensity that made him a superstar in Montreal, Quebec, and saw him wrestle the biggest names in the WWE, from the Ultimate Warrior to Jimmy Snuka to Bret Hart to the Road Warriors to even Hulk Hogan himself. Dino Bravo has been in the ring with them all. Dino either liked you or didn't like you. There was no in between with Dino. He loved to live dangerously. He thought nothing could touch him. And he entered the world of organized crime after being forced out of the wrestling business, which is another thing about Dino I didn't know about. And on March 10th, 1993, the family of Dino Bravo came home and discovered his dead body. Police said he had been struck by 11 bullets. Within days, rumors began to surface that it was a mafia-style execution. 30 years later, Dino's unsolved murder remains one of wrestling's darkest mysteries. That explains how I didn't know about it. Those close to him never talked about what led him down this dangerous path. At least, not openly. Until now. So we kick things off with Claudia Bresciano, who is the daughter of Dino Bravo. And he would bring her into the wrestlers' locker room with all the wrestlers when she was a little girl, which is an ultimate gamble because most people won't even bring their wives around the wrestling locker room. This dude's bringing his daughter. And she was impressed by how big and strong the wrestlers were. She also loved their gear, referring to it as spectacular costumes with sparkles. And that made me laugh my ass off. Let me tell you something. If you were to go into a locker room today and refer to a wrestler's gear as a costume, especially with sparkles, they'd probably kick your ass. But I guess because she was a little girl, she got away with it. And she also loved the ones that wore masks. She also hated getting kisses on her cheek, so they gave each other Eskimo kisses with their noses. Next, we talked to Diane Rivest, who is his wife. Says his real name was Adolfo Bresciano. And I can now understand why he went by Dino Bravo, because you don't want to go into the wrestling business with a name like Adolfo, especially since it sounds really close to Adolf. So yeah, you want to stay away from a fucking name like that. She met Dino where she was working, which at the time was in a bar. And the manager of the place, who also knew boxing and wrestling, was in love with Dino. And he always told her when she got there, Dino's coming, Dino's coming. At the time, she was barely 19. So Dino offered to drive her home. And that's how they started forming a friendship and later a relationship. Next, we talked to Patrick Laprade, who is a wrestling historian. He started watching wrestling when he was 6 years old, and Dino Bravo was like a superhero to him. He was big and strong and full of muscle. He described him as an action figure come to life. And again, that's why in the wrestling business, the people who had those bodies were the ones that got the most exposure, because they wanted wrestlers to look like superheroes, to be larger than life, to be the type of people you wish you could be like, because it made the wrestling more believable. Now, In the early 80s, international wrestling was the leading promotion in Quebec, and Dino Bravo was the premier star of the promotion. He was the name and face of the company. There was almost 2 million people watching international wrestling on Sunday mornings. Tony Mule was the promoter for international wrestling from 1984 to 1986. During that time, they had Rick the Model Martel, King Konga, the Rozier brothers. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Rozier, I can never pronounce that right. Andre the Giant, and others. But Dino was still the top guy. Dino was hard to get to be friends with, but once you were, he stood by you and he had your back. Gino Brito was the promoter of international wrestling from 1980 to 1987 when the company closed its doors. He started wrestling in 1961 and retired from the ring sometime in the late 80s, early 90s. Dino Bravo was considered to be family in international wrestling, so he got along with everybody there. Gino, Dino, and Tony were nicknamed the Italian Connection. Dino later becomes a co-owner and matchmaker in addition to being the top draw in the ring. However, Dino made sure the deserving wrestlers became stars in the province. So even though he was the top guy and being the matchmaker, if you were somebody that was deserving of being a star, if you were ready to be the next big thing, Dino would make sure of it. If you deserved it, you got it. If you didn't, you weren't getting shit. Then you have the Mountie, a.k.a. Jacques Rozier, who has been wrestling for 41 years and has known Dino since he was 18. Dino was the one creating the storylines for the show, and he created himself. He beat everyone that came into the promotion from the outside and worked around his image and his future. So again, Dino's one of those promoters that like to book himself a lot, which tends to happen when wrestlers get in charge of booking. And his daughter says he was passionate and hungry for wrestling and wanted to become more and more famous. The fact that he casted himself as the main attraction didn't sit well with a lot of the other wrestlers, especially the ones trying to make a name for themselves. And that's the thing. That's why you see it today, like with Cody in AEW. Part of the reason he booked himself into a position where he could never challenge for the world title again if he lost to Jericho, and booked it so he would lose to Jericho, was so he wouldn't have to worry about chasing the world title, because he didn't want to be hypocritical. He didn't want to be somebody that's the world champion that's also management, because people have gotten shitted on for that over the years, like Ric Flair, who's part of the booking committee in WCW when he was the world heavyweight champion, or when Cody's own father Dusty would book himself to win title matches, or even when Triple H started getting a little more management in the company and he was being booked as the top guy, dating and marrying the boss's daughter, all that controversy. Well, Dino was getting in that same boat. The Mountie said he booked himself in the main event and put the Rozier's third or fourth match before intermission. As far as he was concerned, he was a main eventer and wanted Dino's spot. In fact, Vince poached a lot of talent from international wrestling for WrestleMania. This is like 1985, the first WrestleMania. And it was unheard of for wrestlers to make the amount of money that Vince would pay them. And that's why Vince was able to poach companies of all their talent, because he could pay them more money than what the promoter was currently paying them. And again, I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it till I'm blue in the face. Regardless of what a wrestler tells you, all of them are about the money. Any wrestler who tells you they're not about the money is one of two things. They're either a liar or a mark. Fact. It was an era where wrestling was fun to watch, with fun characters like Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Coco Beware and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Vince McMahon is smart and knew he needed Dino Bravo if he wanted to draw big crowds in Montreal. In late 85, early 86, Hulk Hogan versus Dino Bravo was being teased in Montreal. Back then, a match between them would draw at least 40,000 people in an Olympic stadium. Apparently, it didn't happen because they were scared that Dino Bravo would become more popular than Hulk Hogan. So Vince canceled the match, and Dino was pissed. And of course, people are going to find some way to blame Hogan for this, because they think Hogan can control Vince McMahon. I personally don't think Hogan would have gave a shit either way, but if Vince makes the call, Vince makes the call. Because in WWE, everybody knows Vince is the boss. No matter how big of a star you are, you might be able to talk to Vince and plead a case with Vince, but if Vince McMahon looks you dead in the eye and says, I'm doing this, then it's fucking happening. And you're not going to overrule him, no matter who you are or how popular you are. Fact. And in fact, he was so pissed off, he tried to use international wrestling to compete with WWE. Which, again, is a stupid fucking thing to do. Because with the exception of WCW, nobody else that has tried to go up against Vince has been successful. WCW was the closest we will ever get to seeing WWE get put out of business. Because they're the only ones that somehow knew how to do it. But no matter how hard he tried, he was no match for the showmanship of the WWE. He was outclassed in almost every single way. Eventually, all the big names in the company jumped ship. From the Mountie, to Rick Martel, to King Konga, who I think became Haku, and Andre the Giant. By the end of 1986, international wrestling was on life support. Dino was frustrated and didn't know what to do. He didn't know whether to stay in and keep fighting Vince or sign with WWE. Well, in order to support his family, he decides to go to WWE. Like Italians, the head of the family has to represent the family, to support the family, and to protect the family. So even though his pride wanted him to keep fighting, he knew financially, as an Italian man, he has to protect and support the family. He has to be the breadwinner. That's just how Italians are. The men have to be men and take care of the family. So he put his pride aside for the sake of his family and signed with WWE. Vince offered him $300,000 guaranteed. And with everything else, he could have made over $1 million, like with merchandise and everything else. If he had stayed in Montreal, he never would have been able to make that kind of money. And probably his family would have starved to death. When Dino came into the locker room, he squashed the beefs he had with everyone else that jumped ship. There was no animosity. He was like, hey, we're all here now, clean slate. Let's go entertain this crowd and let's go make this money. Now, his daughter tells a story of how when Dino was in WWE, she met Jake the Snake Roberts, who came over to the house and sat on their porch with the snake in a bag. And when the snake came out of the bag, she ran away screaming, which I thought was pretty funny. Because obviously, Jake's told a lot of stories where he's had incidents with the snake, where the first time he lived with DDP many years ago, the snake got loose in the house and Jake got kicked out. Or another time where Roddy Piper pulled a gun on him because he tried to prank him with a snake in the locker room. Or when Randy Savage made Jake pull out the snake and had the snake bite him on the leg to make sure it wasn't poisonous before he went out to the ring, and they did that spot with the snake in 91. And then Dino became a whole new man with a whole new step in his career. Dino got Jimmy Hart as a manager to help him fit in with the cartoon-like personalities in wrestling at the time. Jimmy Hart knew how to give credibility to the wrestlers he was managing, as opposed to others who put the spotlight on themselves. Jimmy said wrestlers are Cadillacs, and managers are the hood ornaments on the Cadillacs. And I couldn't agree more with that statement. And I think if Gator was here, he would probably agree with me on that. He would probably agree with Jimmy on that as well. In fact, next chance I get, if we ever talk about managers, I might ask Gator that question, if he agrees with that. At the end of the day, it was a big man's territory, and he had the size and weight to compete with all the big boys. And with Jimmy as a mouthpiece, Dino got a rocket ship strapped to his back as far as getting a push. So he was getting a push. They had Jimmy Hart backing him, and he was climbing the top of the ladder. Now, as Dino started making money, he started changing his lifestyle. He was having multiple homes built so Gino and Tony could live next door to him. He had a red car in the garage that he bought for his daughter, who was only 4 years old at the time. And it was a way of showing his family that he was succeeding in terms of his career. So a 4-year-old girl gets a car before she's even old enough to drive it. I would be intrigued to see if when she got older, she ever drove that car. But it comes at a cost. Vince decides to make radical changes to Dino's character and turns him heel. He goes from being the all-around Canadian hero to anti-American bleach blonde villain. Vince likes to test the boys who stick up to him. You don't see an Italian with blonde hair, at least not in Quebec. His wife bleached his hair, and during the process, his skin got burned because the bleach was so strong. It looked like he had a mop on his head. Everyone thought it was funny and goofy, and that just pissed Dino off. And this is where a lot of the criticism for WWE comes into play. Because on the independents, you can build and create your own gimmick and character. But in WWE, you're a number, and you're just part of the show. And they decide what your gimmick will be. But here's the catch-22. Sometimes the gimmick Vince gives you is better than the one you build on the independents. And on the flip side, sometimes the one you build on the independents is better than what Vince gives you. If you don't believe me, look at Miro. Miro is a prime example of when sometimes WWE is right and the independents is wrong. In this case, Vince was wrong and the independents was right. Fucking with his gimmick was absolute bullshit. If you got something good going, don't make radical changes. Especially if you have an Italian. Do not bleach their fucking hair blonde. Italians don't have blonde hair. I have never in my life seen an Italian with blonde hair. Ever. Ever. Italians, 99% of them have black hair. The rest have gray hair from getting old. That's it. And they just decide, fuck it, I'm not going to dye it anymore. And with the stacked roster, Dino's new gimmick gets lost in the sauce. They look at merchandise sales and what they can do with you. Dino spoke in broken English, so it was hard for people to understand what he was saying, which held him back. No shit. That's why you had Jimmy Hart. What the fuck? In the ring, Dino had a routine and wasn't the type of guy to find something new. He ended up doing jobs for guys that weren't on top, and it was frustrating for him. I don't blame him. The most important thing in wrestling is what you are worth on the market. And if you are getting beat week after week, the people stop believing in you. Boy, is that true. I've seen wrestlers lose one match and the fans walk away. I've seen wrestlers get beat down in one segment and walk away because their attention span is that fucking short. Whether they think it's real or scripted or fake, that's still a thing. He was also in his 40s in WWE and still saw himself as a top guy even though he wasn't one. Which I found to be hilarious because we see so many people in their 40s today that dominate the wrestling ring. When you come to WWE, the one thing you don't bring with you is an ego. Dino had bigger plans for himself than Vince had for him. Vince was very much an out with the old, in with the new kind of guy. Today, not so much, but only because the new can't get the job done. But that is true. With WWE, you don't bring an ego. And I'll use this example. Down in NXT, the Undisputed Era, before they were broken up, was one of the most successful, most popular factions in the history of NXT. In fact, they may be the most successful because they won all the gold. But what made them so good was the fact that even though Adam Cole had a fan base, even though he was popular in Ring of Honor and New Japan and was in the Bullet Club and all that shit, when he came to WWE, he was very coachable. He allowed Triple H and the other trainers to coach him, to teach him, to learn from them. Adam Cole never felt he was too big or too important to learn something new. Despite the fact he can walk out to a arena full of people and they would all go, Adam Cole, baby! He still had enough of humbleness in him that if Triple H told him, hey, correct this, do this, work on this, Adam would be like, okay. He would listen. He was coachable. And that's a big part of being successful. WWE said, this is our playbook. We want you to learn it. Adam Cole learned it and blended it with his own style. And that's why Adam Cole is so fucking good. As well as the rest of the Undisputed Era. Again, prior to their breakup. I mean, they're still good being single, but you know what I mean. His run in the WWE ended in 1992 after his contract expired and wasn't renewed. Of course, this is Dino Bravo. Now Dino was stuck because he no longer had income, and since there's no pension in wrestling, trouble was right around the corner. Especially when you're a wrestler, it's hard to get a real job after that. That's why when you see so many wrestlers whose careers end, they're either bagging groceries in a grocery store or they're limping into a high school gym because they have to wrestle because they have nowhere else to go. You know? So his career eventually came to a permanent end, and he was frustrated because they lived in a big house and the bills were stacking up. Wrestling was all he knew and all he did, so he found himself asking the question that all wrestlers ask when they reach the end of their career: what do I do now? He had no work experience outside of wrestling, so he didn't have a whole lot of options, but he did have some connections. Montreal is not far from the United States, and the corruption is widespread for the police and the government in Quebec. That's why the mafiosi, which is mafia, like Montreal, because it's easy to get stuff done. So next we meet Andre Sedelat, who is a crime reporter in Montreal with an interest in mafia and organized crime. The Catroni family was very active under the authority of Sicilian family Rizzuto. Vic Catroni was the leader of the first mafia family in the history of Quebec. He was the father of the mafia families and was also a former wrestler from the 1930s whose name was Vic Vincent. Dino was related to the family because Vic was his uncle. The Catroni family was their family according to his daughter. Dino wasn't someone with a criminal record. He was just a guy who had connections. And there are people who will say, just because you're seen with certain people didn't mean you're involved. That's true. Just because you have friends in the mafia doesn't necessarily mean you're in the mafia. You just happen to know the guy. Now, according to another crime reporter, Claude Poirier says it depends. The Catroni clan was powerful during this period with regard to cigarette smuggling and alcohol smuggling. Dino was an imposing guy with a nice personality. The people from the mafia family wanted to find a way to approach him. Claude suspects that he was naive and often money does certain things. No shit. When you got to take care of your family and your bills are stacking up and your back's against the wall, you'll just about anything for money. You really will. Some people say, oh, I have better standards than that. Yeah? Well, wait till you got serious bills stacking up and you're starving, or you got a child that has medical bills or needs money for anything. You'll do something. It's like that song, you know? What would you do if your son was at home crying all alone on the bedroom floor because he's hungry, and the only way to feed him is to sleep with a man with for a little bit of money, and his daddy's gone, so we're smoking rock now, in and out of lockdown. I ain't got a job now, so for you this is just a good time, but for me this is what I call life. Dino had a very imposing stature, and when you have two guys like that in the doorway and you owe money to someone, you're going to nicely let them in. Dino's role in the mafia was he was an enforcer. His wife said he was debt collecting and she found it worrisome. He was the strong arm who wasn't afraid of anything and who was strong, so they put him in that role. Dino's experience in wrestling, as well as his physique, made him more than qualified to be a debt collector. Dino also had a very hot temper. They tell a story where Dino once slammed a hockey player's head into his Corvette when he said wrestling was fake. Also, if you point a gun at me, don't threaten me, shoot me, because I'll fucking come for you. And I don't blame him for slamming that head into a Corvette when the guy said wrestling was fake. That's what people need to understand about the word fake. When you say that to a wrestler, you're going to get your ass kicked. Now, me personally, I'm going to look for the context in which you say it. I heard a guy say fake once, but he was complimenting wrestling, and fake just happened to slip out of his mouth, so I know he didn't mean it. So I escorted him away from the danger. Those wrestlers were going to kill him. But if somebody came up to me and said, yeah, wrestling is fake, you guys aren't real fighters, I might not be a wrestler, but if I hear someone say wrestling's fake, I'm beating the shit out of you. Simple as that. I will take a bat to your fucking head. Don't disrespect my business. Now, as Dino settles into his new job and lifestyle, he started having new friends, and they were people that his real family had never known in their entire life. His wife didn't like the vibe in the room when they were there. Turns out they weren't really friends. They were acquaintances that he wanted to do business with. And it was a bad environment, and he was entering an unknown world. His wife worried for him, his life as well as her life and their daughter's life. It was dangerous because you don't know the rules, because if you don't know the rules, you're in trouble. Dino calls Mountie to come see him ASAP. Dino was watching the hockey game the night he died. His wife didn't share much about the final day. Diane and Claudia pulled to the driveway around midnight. There was a snowstorm that night, one of the biggest storms of the winter. They were coming home from the ballet because they were just watching the ballet. They had left the house at 9 p.m. She runs next door to Tony's house in tears holding Claudia. Claude went to the scene of the crime. Dino was sitting there in his armchair in the middle of the room watching TV. There was no signs of a scuffle. 7 bullets to the head and 4 to the body. A pistol and a machine gun are found at the scene, but there was no sign of forced entry and the door was unlocked. The circumstances surrounding the death of Dino Bravo are still unclear. It seems that he knew his attacker or attackers because there were no signs of a break-in and nothing indicated that he tried to defend himself. It also seems that this is the work of professionals, as only this window hit by a bullet indicates any sign that something happened inside. It wasn't easy for his wife because she realized who his friends really were, and it was those that were at the funeral. She has experienced some disappointments and some other theories and leads cross her mind. She asked herself, is it him? Is it him? Is it this? Is it that? She doesn't know anymore. Her daughter drew a picture of the family, her, Dino, and her mom, and brought it to his tomb. Everyone behind her stood up because they thought it was so pure that a child would do that. At first, she didn't recognize him. She recognized his fingers and his hands. His hands were crossed, his nails were chewed down to the bone, so she said, "That's Daddy." They told her that her father had gone to heaven to join the stars, and she wouldn't see him anymore. It was hard for her to realize that her father was dead. She realized it more when she started going to school and making friends and meeting new people who knew who her father was. Even though the death is ruled a mafia-style execution, we still don't know who did it and why. Dino had a successful career as a wrestler. He represented the people of Quebec and had a tragic fall from grace. Dino supposedly confided in a close friend who said he feared for his life. According to his daughter, he didn't have enemies and everybody loved him. Also, he loved people. She didn't see how he could make enemies unless someone or something took a wrong turn. The true depth of Dino's involvement in organized crime stuns the wrestling world and beyond. The evidence shows 17 bullets casing from 2 different firearms on the living room floor, and that at least 2 assassins are involved, and that his death is connected to organized crime. Dino was living in an upscale area where a lot of mafia people lived. At least 2 people were living near Dino were killed at the same time. One was a mafia accountant and the other was a cigarette smuggler. In the 48 hours that followed Dino's murder, never was a piece of valid proven piece of evidence brought to the attention of the police. 3 days after his death, a crucial piece of evidence is uncovered. There was a considerable sum of cash found in the house. A total of $55,000 was found, which included a container of contraband cigarettes. At some point, a truck was robbed of its contents, and it was never able to be determined what happened to the contents. Someone said it was worth $50,000. As far as the investigators are concerned, the death of Dino Bravo is connected to the incident regarding the $50,000 and the contraband cigarettes. They asked if that was a sufficient reason to kill someone, and Claw says people were killed for less than that, especially in that world. By the early 90s, organized crime is flourishing in Montreal. Alongside the mafia are biker gangs and smugglers operating out of First Nation Reserve. What connects them all is the lucrative business of contraband cigarettes. The natives were the suppliers for the smugglers, and all the cigarettes came from the reserve. Dino loved his daughter very much, and they had a great bond, almost like they were friends. He would take her to meet the natives. His wife had no idea how he got involved with them. Dino eventually told his family they were dealing contraband cigarettes. They would sell them for $5 a carton. They sold thousands. Rick Martel was the only wrestler who knew. He declined to be part of the show, but talked about it in a 2007 interview. He said Gino had a monopoly with the natives because they were fans of his wrestling. Control over the narcotics trade is in a constant state of flux. Each criminal group is looking for an edge, even that means crossing into somebody else's turf, which happens a lot and can end pretty badly. Dino was doing so well with the cigarettes that the guy selling cocaine wanted to do business with him and get in on the action. The cocaine guy got a cut of Dino's cigarette sales, and Dino got a cut of the cocaine sales. So Dino never actually sold the cocaine, but would still get a cut from it. A few days before the murder, the police seized a large quantity of cigarettes in a warehouse. They had surveillance of the warehouse and saw Dino with people who were on investigation. It was a $400,000 seizure. And when the coke guy went to pick up his shipment, the police were there and he got arrested, and the heat started there. The police then barricaded the house and searched every inch of the house. They were supposed to get back to them, but there was no follow-up, and the family didn't get any news after. There were no leads, and they couldn't continue the investigation. It wasn't clear which gang was involved. The murder was violent, and the mafia is more classy when they shoot somebody. Some say it was friends because he was in his chair holding a remote. Others say it was the First Nations Reserve, although they weren't known to kill people off the reservation. So others say it was a motorcycle gang under contract from the reserves. Decades later, no one knows and aren't sure if they'll ever know. His wife got rid of everything he owned after the murder because it was too hard for her. So they have no memorabilia. It was given away to friends and family. 1970 to 1992 was how long his career lasted in wrestling. Dino made sure there was harmony between the boys. He knew how to make a team. His daughter thinks it's better that they don't know because it would only make them angrier against the person who did this. She just hopes the person who did it got what they deserved. She forgives him for making bad decisions because she knows he did it for them. She wishes he was here to be a grandfather to her kids. And the police declined to be a part of this show because the case is still open. Honestly, that's what fascinates me the most. The fact that this case is still open and we have no idea who did it. But I can tell you this. If the police seized $400,000 worth of cigarettes or coke, that's enough to get somebody killed. Especially if they know about Dino. You know, Dino with people who are on investigation. So obviously, if this shit's going down, I can see how Dino would have gotten killed. But if it wasn't the mafia, then the mafia definitely paid somebody, because that is true. The mafia is very classy when they kill people. The mafia doesn't like to murder people in cold blood like that, not that violently. They at least will shoot. They'll try to shoot you in the back of the head. They try to do one bullet done. And usually if there's a mess, they clean up the mess. And they said that they found a machine gun and a pistol at the scene. Who the fuck leaves their gun at the scene of a goddamn crime? There's no way it's the mafia. The mafia has never been that sloppy. Ever. Ever. They're never that sloppy. This is sloppy work. So I can see maybe it being a motorcycle gang under contract. Because motorcycle gangs, I think, would be that violent and that sloppy. But that's just my theory. Overall, you know, Dino Bravo had a hell of a career. And I like the fact that his daughter understands why he joined organized crime and doesn't hold it against her. Because a lot of times when people get involved in crime, it's usually because they're trying to make money to feed their families. That's why a lot of times you see people selling drugs, like outside of their house, or having a drug business. Usually when they're doing that, they're doing it just to feed their families because they have no other way to do it. They're not trying to cheat the system. They're not trying to keep people high. They're not trying to destroy the fabric of the country. Most of them just want to feed their fucking families. And when you can't get a job anywhere else because you're either A, not qualified, or B, you have a criminal record and no one wants to trust you, it's only a matter of time before you go back to crime or turn to crime. Most people who get into crime just want to make some fucking money and take care of their family. There are some that are scumbags and want to be scumbags, but most of them just trying to feed their families. So I'm glad that his daughter understood that. That's why Dino got into it. It was business. And with the mafia, that's all it ever is business. They very seldom get personal. But anyway, that, ladies and gentlemen, will wrap up this episode of the Boochcast Reviews, Darkside of the Ring. Hopefully someday we'll get some answers to this Dino Bravo thing once and for all. I think with the technology we have, I see no reason why we shouldn't be able to figure it out, but hopefully we will. But make sure you guys tune in next week. We're going to have a real good one for you guys. We're going to have the slap heard round the world. That's right. The slap heard round the world with Dr. D and John Stossel. You're going to hear all about it next week here on the Boochcast Reviews, Darkside of the Ring. So make sure you guys hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified so you never miss another episode of Boochcast Reviews, Darkside of the Ring, as well as other additional Boochcast YouTube content. Also, make sure you are following us on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, and Google Podcasts. The links to all of them are down in the description box. Also, make sure you're following us on all of our social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch. Links to everything in the description box. And, of course, support the show through Patreon. The link's in the description box. You guys know the spiel by now, so I ain't got to get into it. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Until then, pizza, baby!